Welcome to If the Public Only Knew, the show that pulls back the curtain on what it really takes to build and lead a business. Host Gary Cinderbrandt sits down with some of today's most dynamic CEOs, founders, and leaders to dig into their origin stories, hard-earned lessons, and the missteps that nearly derailed it all. These are unfiltered, no-hype conversations designed to inspire, challenge, and fuel your own journey. Now here's your host, Gary Cinderbrandt.
Welcome back to If the Public Only Knew. I'm your host, Gary Cinderbrandt. Today we have someone that is, I think, truly unique, and I think can share some wisdom that would impact all of us. Our guest today is Nick Jonsson. Nick, until very recently, was a managing director, I believe, in Singapore of the Executive Global Network. Now, for those of you domestically that haven't heard of it, it's because primarily we're domestic, but this is one of the largest peer-based groups in the world. Nick has recently stepped down and hopefully or happily given the responsibility of becoming the managing director of this peer group to his wife, which hopefully will go well. Nick now spends his time as a keynote public speaker, talking on topics from self-reliance to overcoming loneliness, to really becoming a version of your best self. It's my pleasure today to welcome Nick Jonsson to our podcast. Nick, how are you doing today?
Oh, wonderful, Gary. Thank you so much for that warm welcome. It's so great to be with you.
So, Nick, I know you speak on a variety of different things and you're spending more and more time out there. Can you take me through, maybe let's go back 10, 12, 13 years before you kind of became this version of yourself, and just walk us quickly through, if you would, where were you and what brought you forward, not only to run one of the most successful peer groups in the world, but also to be as in demand as you are currently as a speaker? I'm really interested.
Yeah, so if we go back about 10 years ago, I was still elbowing my way up the top of the corporate ladder, striving for the success and achieving goals of companies and others, basically. That was what I was on. And once I reached the top there, I started to feel a bit cheated on that because I started to question, was this what I worked so hard on and so on? And with that then came some self-doubt. And with that, I thought I need to change my life, but I did it perhaps too much by myself without asking the right questions, without being vulnerable. With that, then I resigned from my job without a new true plan. When my wife started to question me and challenge me what was happening in my life, rather than answering the questions, I isolated myself further, and that led to a divorce. So I basically had a big crisis and hit what I would say my rock bottom. That was a journey that was going through about 10 years from now.
So I imagine that when that happened and you had achieved a level of success that you probably only dreamt about when you first started in that role, and you got there and you found it somewhat empty. At what point was there a tipping point where you just decided, I can't do this anymore, it's not me, I've got to do something else, but I'm not going to find that something else until I walk away from this? What was that like? You walked away from success by any measure. And how did your friends react?
Yeah, and the issue in this whole thing was the way I walked away from it. I was not indeed vulnerable about it. I didn't discuss with any coaches. I didn't talk to any mentors. I didn't belong to a peer group. I didn't have a mastermind. There was, in fact, no one I had a conversation with. And in the organization that I've been working then, I actually had worked for that company twice. I had really good relationships with my direct boss, with regional bosses, people in the head office. I knew them well, personally and professionally, but I didn't open up the conversation. I didn't share with them what was on my mind and my insecurities and so on. Instead, I just did it all by myself, and I crafted my resignation letter, which I held on to for 6 months before I sent it in. And when they asked me why I resigned, I didn't even have any answers. So the issue was that I was not talking to anybody about it. And that then led to one crisis after another. And of course, coming home and sharing to your wife that you just resigned from this great job, which was your dream, without an explanation, people will ask you what's going on here. And I was basically just saying, well, I have another plan. I'm going to invest in some companies and I'm going to become an entrepreneur. And I did that. And that led me even further down because I lost all my money I invested and I was almost bankrupt as well.
So this is really interesting. You knew it was wrong, but you didn't know what was right. But you just knew what you were doing was not sustainable. So it sounds like from possibly some external pressure, not wanting to see that you were just not doing a thing, you reached around, found some other things that weren't right, both quantitatively and qualitatively. Where did the idea of who you are today or who you wanted to become, that sounds like it emerged out of darkness?
Yes, it did indeed. And from that place, when I resigned from my job, filed for a divorce, and traded basically my gym membership for a bar stool, healthy diet to fast food and pizza, gaining about 60 pounds and completely losing myself. Again, on the outside, I said I was having a good time, but on the inside, I was falling apart. And that was basically 3 years tumbling down until I hit my rock bottom. And it was at that rock bottom that my life turned around. It was, and many times they say that we perhaps have to hit that bottom to be able to turn it around. And I can remember saying that I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. And with that, I started to ask for help. And that was but it took me 3 years to reach that stage before I took ownership for my own stuff and asking for help.
Was there a particular event that happened where you knew you needed to do that? Or was it something that you realized if I get out of this, I just can't do it alone? I don't know where the next iteration is, but I know I'm not going to find it on my own. Was that a singular decision, like a big aha moment? Or was it just you'd run out of other things to try?
Yeah, at this time, I basically had started to plan for my own funeral, you could say. I had written my testament, my will. I cleaned up my act, and I sent these documentations to my parents and so on, and my ex-wife. And of course, they start to question me and ask me what's going on. I just want to make sure that everything is in order, which is typically a sign of someone who's suicidal and they want to clean up the act. So that was what's going on in my head. At the same time, I didn't have the energy or the drive, so I didn't plan to end it, but I just knew that I'm going to fade away here. But then something happened that changed everything. My left foot became swollen like an elephant foot. And that became a big problem suddenly because I couldn't put on a shoe. I couldn't even go outside of the house. And with that, I became full of fear. And I really, really thought that my body was giving up. It felt like that. And then I got some fear and I had to ask for help for that. I had to go out and see a doctor to ask for it. They did x-ray, they did MRI, they didn't find anything wrong with the foot. They even checked it for gout. There was nothing wrong with it, but it was a psychiatrist then who diagnosed it as a psychosomatic illness. So a psychosomatic illness in the sense that I had for 3-4 years here, held all my emotions in, bottling everything up, holding it in. So I was so tense at this time that basically, the body had to express it somehow. It expressed it in the foot. And with that, then I also had met the woman who I share this with. And with that started my recovery.
So at that point in time, it sounds like once it was diagnosed as being a stress-related psychosomatic display, at that point, would you say that was kind of the moment of awakening for you?
Yes, it was. And the fact that I just shared this with this woman who today is my wife for 7 years, maybe we can call her a guardian angel or something, because she listened with empathy. And that was all I needed. I needed to share that. And it is this saying, a problem shared is a problem halved. And I can remember clearly feeling that as I shared how I felt to her. And being honest about my feelings and taking ownership for it was what I needed. And that was the first stage then. And she joined me to the doctor. And with that, another relief. We then went to see a joint friend of ours, and we shared my story. And again, I had that feeling of sort of coming back.
Was that your first experience with empathy?
It was my first real experience with empathy, yes.
Was that must have been somewhat of an eye-opening experience for you that there was someone out there that actually was willing to listen and try and embody what you were feeling. As you say, a problem shared is a problem halved. I love that quote. But I think that this whole concept of empathy is probably one of the least understood emotions across humanity. That if we all shared equal amounts, the world would indeed be a different place. And it seems like you, as you said, made yourself vulnerable and found your guardian angel to share it. What was her initial reaction to this?
Her reaction was that she was surprised because I held it together quite well. Yes, she could see I'd gained weight, and yes, I was drinking too much alcohol. But she could see that I was trying to have a good time, and I was out, I was social, I was still holding a job together decently well, so I was functioning somehow. But behind the scene, it was falling apart. So she was surprised when I shared it, but she listened with empathy, and that was what I needed. And for her, it was not a big thing. The doctor acted like it was normal. So it was only in my mind I built this up to being something so big, so terrible. And it was that was the issue. This needed to be normalized, and I needed that stigma to be removed. With that, I felt okay again.
And that started kind of, you would say, climbing out of that rock bottom spot. Did you know you would end up where you are today at that point? So
No, I
walk me
didn't.
through that.
So what happened then next was indeed taking ownership for my own stuff. And I had to admit to myself that alcohol had become a problem. While it was serving me well in business development and so on before, networking, going out, socializing with clients and all of that was great. But this time I had used it also to medicate myself as I've been sick and I was having issues with anxiety, depression, and I was using it as a medication instead, and I become addicted. As soon as I then took ownership for that and I joined some of those recovery 12-step program meetings, something else happened again. I came in there and I shared honestly and took ownership for it. In that room were other people, other business executives who had faced that problem before. Some had 3 years sobriety, some a year, some had 3 years. There was someone there even with 30 years, and they were there then to help others. And with that, then I felt normalized. I felt that they also gone through this. If they gone through this and come out on the other end, I will too. And I walked out of that meeting. It's 7.5 years ago, and I've not had one alcoholic drink since. I have not felt any need for it. So all I needed was again that empathy, feel listened to, feeling understood, and then the problem was solved.
So it seems to me that you then realize there's a much bigger world out there, and it may not just be the issues with alcohol addiction, but maybe the underlying causes, the stress, the self-doubt, lack of self-confidence, things like that, that seem to evolve to where you are now. I know that, you mentioned suicide before, and I know that it's rare. You can talk to anyone that's lived a full life where suicide ideation has not come in, at least into their life or into a loved one's life. Seems like you were wise enough to recognize the signs as you started your climb back. How did you go from that position with the meetings to expanding that into what, from all intents and purposes, is a dramatically successful speaking career?
Yeah, what happened then was something that was not of my own making. About 1 year into my recovery, an event happened that would change my life forever. I was working with a gentleman and we were working on some events on the future of work and so on. And I remember clearly today being there for the rehearsal and he didn't show up. And I went to grab my phone looking for his phone number to call him, but I had all these missed calls and messages that Simon had died of suicide.
Oh,
And that was basically a moment then when I realized, I'm 1 year into my recovery, I'm feeling quite okay now, but all the thoughts came back to me and I started to ask myself, how close to this was I? Why didn't I know more? Why couldn't I prevent it? Because I'd seen him just a few days before, but he never shared anything with me. And that was basically when everything changed, Gary. That's when I became a fundraiser and volunteer for a suicide prevention agency. And at that point, I went also viral on social media with my own story for the first time outside the bubble of my wife, my doctor, and my close friends and the support groups. It was time to tell the world.
So how did from there, when you say it went viral, you told your story, YouTube, podcast, how did you get that out?
I made a LinkedIn post that day when I had just been approved to be a fundraiser and a volunteer for the suicide prevention agency. So I made a YouTube video to announce it. And I asked people to share the post, click like, and donate money to the cause to prevent executive loneliness. That was basically the cause, and that we can talk about challenges in the workplace so it doesn't have to go this far.
Were
That
you
was the
surprised
message.
by the response?
I was, Gary. I went out for a run and came back 1 hour later to my computer, and I never seen anything like it. It was hundreds of messages from people writing all around the world.
That's fabulous. It's interesting, Nick. Um, a lot of times, if I'm talking to younger advisors or I'm talking to people that are kind of between careers and they're searching for something, one of the things I've always felt strongly about is that the less intention you have to something you think you want, the more open you become to that thing finding you. Sometimes through tragedy, sometimes through celebration, but you have to be open to what's there. It's like the messages are being sent. Unfortunately, we're not always in a position to receive them. Your story is pretty amazing because you had to go from closing everybody off to trying to kind of exhibit on the outside that things were fine as you knew they weren't. And then at some point, having the ability, not all at once, but to slowly open yourself to what I call the power of the possibility. And then this found you on that run. I imagine since that day, you've been a completely different person.
Yes, absolutely. Because as I shared before, when I just started to have a conversation with my new wife about it, I felt better. When we discussed with the doctor, I felt better. When I saw the support group, I felt better. Suddenly, I got an outlet to share this live on TV, on radio. I was in the biggest spread of Singapore history
Mm.
related to mental health, 4 pages in the main newspaper, an interview with me, lonely leaders, and these kind of titles. And the journalists loved it because they said, we've been looking for a leader like you to step forward with name and to be interviewed for years, but no one wanted to be seen as that lonely leader. No one wanted to be associated talking about suicide. Those are topics that could be career suicide. In fact, I had also a lot of negative voices. There were people close to me, friends, old bosses who said, Nick, don't talk about that out there. No one will ever hire you again. People said, Nick, if you talk about that, you will not want to be able to get a life insurance. You won't get a medical insurance. It was all these messages. But you know what, Gary? At that time, I was driven by a bigger purpose. I was electric. I was moving for that force of suicide prevention, and I could not think about what they were saying. I was just driven by something bigger.
Fascinating. Nick, prior to us joining today and speaking, you had a keynote to a group of what I would call unique individuals. And if you wouldn't mind, I would love to hear how that developed and the message that you sent.
Yes, and it's a different audience than the audience I normally work with these days is for men's group, and I work mainly with men, of course, with some women also. But the group I was sharing my talk to online before was to about 75 women in Afghanistan. So women who are, struggling financially, women who struggle to deliver in their professional work. Some are highly educated, but they are suppressed by their situation, and to find some hope in their situation. So I shared my story, and with that giving them some power and hope and light. And I shared a module, which is what I do in my keynotes and workshops, also the 5 steps that I went through, starting with surrender, which is what I share today, and basically also encouraging them to surrender. If there was something outside their control, surrender that and focus what's in the control. That's where we started today's conversation.
Fascinating. Do you speak, I guess the Dari would be the native language, or do you speak in their language, or how did that go through?
We spoke in English today, and most of them were quite okay in English, actually. They're educated women.
It's fascinating. It really is. Um, and you talk about having a tough hill to climb with the current environment that these women face. I imagine that the questions were probably a bit unusual. Um, what was your general impression? Do you feel they have hope? Do you feel they have agency, that they can direct the future of their lives?
there was some questions indeed about hope, and about feeling helpless, about feeling disappointed on society, disappointed on people. And all we can do then is really to turn that back into what can we do with this. And I spoke a lot about spirituality, the source or power greater than ourselves. And through prayer and meditation, we can take those hopeless tasks and try to ask for help externally. That's something that helped me also in my journey. But then come back to it and look at what is it in my control. And some of the tips for them today was, join more of these online events. They will have speakers every month now. They also have their own cohort and they can learn between them. They have access to a lot of learning materials online, and there's so many online courses and materials. They can grow and they can develop themselves. And thanks to the internet, they can be part of a world externally and getting some of that positive hope and learnings that is available today.
Nick, I have one last question, and you can take it any direction that you want. I noted during COVID, your ability to add to your peer group and your network groups literally exploded. With the background of where technology is taking us right now, where communication is clearly, we can see, allows us to connect in real time anywhere in the world, in conjunction with what we see AI doing, do you see these evolutions as causing people to want to connect on a one-to-one level more so or less so, where we're just kind of buried in our phones all day, interacting with social media versus doing what you and I are doing today? Where do you see that going?
I see a big variation there, I would say, in general, depending on perhaps what countries we are in and also in the age group. The younger generation is struggling remarkably with this, spending too much time on social media and on their devices is what I'm seeing in general. And I also know it because my latest TEDx talk was in Indonesia. I was called by the university in Jakarta by the school dean there, basically saying, Nick, we are really struggling. The students are not sleeping at night. They take the mobile phones and basically keeping them under the pillow with notifications on. They're online the whole time. And if we look at the statistics, they are the heaviest WhatsApp users in the world. They are using this, living and breathing inside the machine 24/7. And that is definitely damaging their health. If I had an addiction of alcohol, they certainly have a social media addiction. And it's only by surrendering to that and repatching a life that they can overcome it. But what I see otherwise, Gary, in our generation, perhaps, we look at it perhaps from a little bit of a distance and finding some white space time. And I think we're coming back to more of living more life, appreciating nature and time outside devices. And I think that we're handling it quite well. I'm generalizing now, but that's what I see.
Well, I'm hopeful that the folks that were born after you and I are going to find meaning in that as they go forward. I think that, the tools are nothing more than that. They facilitate cultural change. They should enhance our lives, but certainly not dominate our lives. Nick, I can't thank you enough for joining me today. It is a fascinating topic. I think what you're doing obviously has impacted everyone you've spoken with. I don't know if you have anything planned domestically in the United States, but if you did, I would certainly really value being able to sit in the audience and listen to your message. I'm sure it's going to be fantastic. Last thing, tell me about where people can find you online, podcast, YouTube videos. How do we find you?
Yeah, thank you so much, Gary, for having had me on your show. People can find me on LinkedIn. I'm quite active there. It's Nick Jonsson, NickJonsson. Otherwise, if someone is interested in checking out my book, it's on Amazon. It's called Executive Loneliness, and it's also on Audible.
Excellent. Speaking of Audible, I fall asleep with that under my pillow most nights.
Fantastic.
Nick, thanks so much for joining us today. I wish you nothing but success going forward, and hopefully your spouse's new job won't backfire on you and say, you've got to take this back over. Hopefully that's going to work out, but you'll have a great mentor.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to If the Public Only Knew. Our guest today has been Nick Jonsson, just an all-around really interesting individual. Folks, thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to If the Public Only Knew. Don't forget to follow the show and share it with anyone who's ready for the real raw stories behind the business successes. Join Gary next time for another powerful conversation that will leave you inspired and ready to take action.